Okay, it's 7 o'clock and it's Farminar time here on this Tuesday night, November the 28th of 2017. Um, we've got a lot of ground to cover tonight, so we're going to get started real quick here. So I'm Steve Carlson. I work at Practical Farmers of Iowa, and I'm in the PFI office in Ames, Iowa. So if you're tuning in from wherever you're at, you should let us know in the chat box. It's fun to see where people are at. And so tonight, as you know, we've got 3 PFI members who are all farm organically and have been experimenting with roller crimping to terminate their cover crops for the last few years now. And so in true PFI fashion, we're gonna listen to them about what went well, what didn't go well, what they'd do differently, and then we'll have time for them to answer your questions about roller crimping cover crops near the end of the presentation. So the way things are going to work is that I'm going to do a quick introduction here about PFI. We're going to have Billy do a quick introduction to roller crimping cover crops. Then we've got Scott Shriver from Jefferson, Iowa, talk about crimping rye going into soybeans. Then Francis Thicke of Fairfield, Iowa, he's going to talk about the same pattern on his farm near Fairfield. And then we're going to have Billy Sammons wrap things up with his experience crimping hairy vetch going into corn this year. So 3 real knowledgeable organic row crop farmers and a lot of information to cover, so I'm going to do this real quick here. This is part of the Practical Farmers of Iowa Fall Farminar series. We've got 3 more topics here that's going to carry us up till the end of the year. Next week is growing flowers for market, and then the following 2 weeks might be of interest to this crowd, and that's integrating livestock and cover crops for profit. First, on the 12th, we're going to have a farmer from Kansas. On the 19th, someone from Nebraska. So those will be great presentations on how to make cover crops pay on a farm with livestock. So real quick then, PFI's been around for 30 years. That's Practical Farmers of Iowa, and we are a member-based, farmer-led organization. We call ourselves a big tent. We welcome all kinds of farming enterprises, farms of all sizes, and all kinds of shapes and sizes. So if you're interested in PFI, plug into our programming. We've got to have something that interests you. Our mission at PFI is strengthening farms and communities through farmer-led investigation and information sharing. And we accomplish that mission through a number of ways. First and foremost, we started with our cooperators program, which is our on-farm research program. And I think all of our speakers tonight have participated in our cooperators program before. Where we help farmers design and implement replicated on-farm research trials on whatever issues that they're curious about. And then a major part of our mission is helping farmers share what they learn on their farms with other farmers in a variety of ways. That's on-farm field days, that's Farminars like tonight, and then socials, retreats, and then we have also our big annual conference coming up January 18th through 20th, and we have a new website for that, pficonference.org. Check that out. That's got details on all 50-some sessions that we've got happening over that weekend. We have a great keynote speaker coming from the UK, best-selling author. So check out that website for information about our retreat, or excuse me, about our conference. As a member-based organization, we want you to join us. Our speakers tonight, Scott and Billy and Francis, are all part of our PFI network, the types of people who want to see a sustainable agriculture across the landscape and who are willing to help each other improve their profitability and efficiency and improve their stewardship. So join Practical Farmers if you like what we're doing. Last thing is, use that chat box to ask your questions. If these speakers see your questions as they come in, they'll happily answer them. Otherwise, I'll circle back near the end of the presentation. We're going to do about an hour of this and then hopefully save at least 20 to 30 minutes for Q&A with everyone here. So put your questions in as they come up, but if they don't get answered, I'll try and make sure that they do at the end of the night. Be respectful to other people, try and stay on topic, and I do want to ask to please give us some feedback. So that link right there is a live link. You can click that, it'll open your web browser, and then fill out a really quick survey at the end of the presentation. I'll try and remember to put this link back in the chat box later, but this is your opportunity to tell us how tonight's presentation went, but also what topics you want to hear about in the future. So this is all farmer-led stuff, so you got to tell us what you want to hear, and then we'll try and provide that programming for you. So take that survey. I really appreciate it. That's all I've got to say. I am now going to pull up this next presentation. We're going to have Billy speak real quick, and then we'll go into Scott, and then Francis, then back to Billy, then to Q&A. So we've got a lot of ground to cover. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And Billy, when you see this presentation come up, you can go ahead and take it over.
Okay. It's happening. It's in process. Oh yeah. Okay. So you can give me the okay, I guess, Steve, that I'm coming across?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, great. Thanks. Hi, everybody, and I want to thank PFI and Steve in particular because this is a tremendous amount of work to set one of these up, and I think without the organization and without Steve's experience, we would not be doing this. So thank you so much for what you do and giving us the opportunity to share our experiences tonight. I'm going to do a quick 2.5 minute, and I'm actually going to read it because I think I might go out on a tangent if I was to try to do it otherwise. I really had a great opportunity to have a discussion with Jeff Moyer at the Iowa Organic Association this last week, and I was very curious about how he had even come up with the idea about doing what he did as the farm manager at the Rodale Institute 20-some years ago. And so he shared this story with me, and he gave me some links to find out more. So I'm going to give you this little background about how the whole idea of utilizing this type of technology came about. So it was starting in the 1980s in Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. The roller-crimper, which was actually called the knife roller, was instrumental in the government's transformation of agricultural lands from conventionally tilled to no-till managed, with extensive cover crop usage. There was a lack in tourism. There were a lot of diseases that were unknown where they were coming from, and they came to the conclusion that they needed to reduce the use of synthetic chemicals in these countries as much as they could. So they went from, in less than a decade, nearly 75% of all farmed land, or many millions of acres, became no-till managed in 9.5 years. So it went from 15% to 75% in 9 years. The purpose in the introduction of the roller-crimper, or knife roller, was to reduce the need of herbicides to control weeds, increase the amount of organic matter in the soil, reduce nitrate leaching, improve soil fertility, keep the soil cooler, improve water infiltration and storage in the soil, and provide a year-round cover to control erosion while providing nutrient recycling. I just love that sentence, and that comes from Jeff, and it's a mouthful, but it's basically trying to make the soil as healthy as possible. So it was determined by South American researchers that cover crops, both grasses, grains, and legumes, were necessary to keep the no-till system healthy and sustainable. So following the progress in South America closely, in 2002, the Rodale Institute, and Jeff Moyer in particular, collaborated with John Brubaker, who was a local mechanic, and with assistance from a SARE grant, they built a roller-crimper for use in a no-till organic system. That's only 15 years ago. The original experiment was a success with no-till corn and soybeans using a variety of different cover crops. That particular year they did wheat, rye, and hairy vetch. So the use of a roller-crimper sparked my attention about 4 years ago after reading Jeff Moyer's book. And then now in the Midwest, it's gained considerable momentum over the last decade. And tonight, we're really fortunate, all of us, to be able to share our experiences on 3 different farms in Iowa. And we're going to start with Scott. So
All right,
I guess
yeah.
I can move this on.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yep.
There we go.
Scott, whenever you're ready, you're up.
I can do that. Okay.
Yep.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, Billy just maybe took a little bit of my thunder away. We have the main purpose of doing the no-till or the roller crimper and the soybean program was to take advantage of all the benefits that you get with a cover crop but then really do the opposite. Of some of the disadvantages that we found with the cover crop has been that it actually increases the amount of tillage we do because we've tilled under the cover crop before we plant corn or soybeans. So the main purpose for us was to reduce tillage, but then also we're reducing tillage because we're not having to cultivate, rotary hoe, and do all of our weed control mechanically, that the cover crop serves as a mulch to hold back the weeds. So in addition to all the other benefits that cover crops give us, those were the two things that we really looked at to gain from with the roller-crimper cover crop program. We planted the rye in 2016, in the fall of 2016, and it was a variety not stated. We are going to go to the Arrowstook rye this year, or we have already. We planted it this fall, and that should gain us a week. I think it'll gain us two things actually. It'll gain us about a week that we can roll it and terminate it sooner because it's an earlier variety. But I think maybe even more importantly, your variety not stated, it can be a mixture of varieties, and therefore it may not be in a stage to terminate. I mean, you know, some of the plants are, some aren't, and so it's really maybe harder to judge when the right time is for that variety not stated cultivar. We did it on 2 fields this past year, and actually had 2 kind of different results. And most of my slides are geared towards the one field because I was thinking of that field because I also did the PFI cooperator study on some row widths. But in that field, we put down 3,000 gallons of hog manure before we drilled the rye in 7.5-inch rows. We planted on the 11th of October last year and we were recommended to plant about 3 bushels per acre. So, and that was about as high as our drill would go. I think we got out 160 pounds per acre. The other field, the only real difference there was that we didn't put on the hog manure, and but it was planted about the same time at the same rate. Oops. Okay. Kind of jumping ahead a little bit. You know, the rye did pretty decent last fall, grew this spring, and as far as weed suppression after we rolled it, it was pretty good. In the field with the hog manure, I'll just talk about our the biomass that we had. I mean, the rye was 6 feet tall, thick. As part of that PFI program, we took samples and we ranged, I think our biomass ranged from 9,000 to 26,000 pounds per acre with an average of like 15,000 pounds per acre. All the literature says what you need to have adequate weed suppression is about 8,000 pounds, 6,000 to 8,000 pounds per acre. So I think it was the hog manure because the other field that we planted, it had 5,000 to 6,000 pounds of biomass, and we just did one test on that field, but it was just driving through it. It was obvious that it didn't have just the thickness of the stems and the amount of biomass wasn't nearly what we had in the other field. I will say, and our soybeans, and we'll go on and you'll see that they didn't really grow very good in either field, but the field with the higher biomass, I think it even held back their growth possibly even more. So we had good weed control until late in the year, and I think part of that is that our soybeans never canopied the rows, so I think that wasn't the fault of the rye. In some of our conventionally tilled organic fields, the roller-crimper program was still better than what we ended up after rotary hoeing, cultivating, and that whole program. Um, let's see, we planted the soybeans on the 1st of June, and then we roller crimped 5 or 6 days later. So we roller crimped on the 6th of June. You can see in this picture, that's pretty much what it looked like after we rolled it. Had a few tillers stand back up, and again, I think that can possibly be part of that variety not stated. I think you can get a more even kill if you have one variety of rye out there. This is what our tractor looked like while we were going through the rye. The tractor's sitting in I think a weed patch, but that is rye pollen, not any other kind of pollen, and it is something you want to be a little bit prepared for, because you're going to get a lot of it. And we tried to roll it when the rye was at 75 to 100% in anthesis, or shedding pollen. And that was the other thing that I felt was difficult to know when, because you can't, you can go out and you can see some pollen shedding one morning, and so they say, well, it takes about a week, and you go out, you can't hardly look at that rye head and say, well, okay, there's, it's obvious that now 75% of the anthers are off of it, and but we felt like we waited an adequate amount of time. I'd be interested to know if other people felt, that it was difficult to tell when that time came. This is a picture behind the planter, planting into the rye. We planted into the rye standing, and then we rolled it 5 days later. We planted it in 30-inch rows, 180,000 seeds per acre. Our yields were really off, and I'll go on and probably explain why. This is a picture of the soybeans, and you can barely see them. I'll try to use this little thing, but oops. I don't know why. Well, I can't drag the pointer, but there you go. Just point to some of the, you can see those beans, and this is almost a month after we planted, and they're just barely poking through. And that seemed to be our issue, that soybeans just didn't take off and grow. I'll go to the next slide. This is on the 11th. This is actually in the field that had less of the biomass. And there's two things in this photo. One, it's kind of showing you that still, even after 6 weeks after they're planted, they're just not doing a whole lot. But also, you can see it looks a little greener on the right and a little browner on the left. We actually went through with a no-till cultivator because the grass was coming through on this field, especially with the lighter, with less biomass, and we cultivated there on the left, and so it actually worked pretty good. But one thing we found, and you can kind of see there in some spots, looks like the beans are gone, and I think they were. We were real dry, and we had single sweeps, and we had about 6 to 8 inches between the sweeps for the row. And when we went through this, we actually lifted the dirt bridged between the shovels, and it lifted and uprooted some of the soybeans. That's why we only did like one round and quit. We kind of looked to see what was going on, and a couple of days later, this is what it looked like. Go on to the next one. This is also on the 18th of July, and you can see again the row. You can kind of see a row there, but again, this is 6 weeks after we planted, and this was kind of typical, especially in the heavier tilled field, or the heavier biomass field that we had. What I think it was a multitude of problems that added up together. We had conditions where the planter did a fantastic job, and then we had some conditions where the planter made a seed trench but didn't close the seed trench. So the seed was sitting down in the seed trench and, you know, in an open V. And then we also had some places where, in fact, the rye was so big on the one farm that in places it had blown. We had a windstorm and it went down. And so, especially in those places, I found soybeans just basically on top of the ground, not even planted. And I think all those were exacerbated with a lack of rain. We had pretty good moisture when we planted, but and I think the rye sucked the ground a little bit dry. And then it rained about 2 weeks later. We got about a half an inch, and then it just didn't rain more than 2/10 at a time the rest of the summer. I mean, July, August, I think it didn't rain again, a decent rain until September. So some of those other problems might have been fixed with a good heavy rain, but we never got that. And I know this all sounds bad, and like I said, we had yields in the poorer field of 15 bushel an acre, and in the field with less biomass but a little better stand, that only did 24 bushel an acre. But we're going to try it again next year. I know people are making this work, and I'm pretty sure that we can make it work. But we're going to add some weight to our planter. We've got a pretty good system on our planter with hydraulic down pressure, but you can push down on those row units all you want, but if you don't have enough weight on the planter itself to counteract that force that you're pushing down with, you'll just raise the whole planter, and I think we had some of that going on. And then the other thing, I put cast iron closing wheels on the planter so that I felt they'd be more aggressive in closing that seed trench. I was a little afraid to try a spiked closing wheel because I thought it might get wrapped up in the rye, but I do think maybe that's what we needed, at least on one side. Maybe go with one cast iron closing wheel, one spiked closing wheel next year. We get that closed. I think that's all I've got if we want to go on to Francis.
Well, Scott, actually, before we move on real quick, it looks like there's a couple questions about your planter. So I didn't hear, did you say what kind of planter you were using? And Wade wants to know if it's no-till.
Well, no, it's not a no-till planter. It's a Kinsey planter, pretty basic, 3,000 row unit. We've got precision planting meters, and the precision planting's downforce system, the hydraulic downforce on it. But being organic, and this was the first year we've tried this. I mean, so typically we're planting in tilled fields, and
yep.
And I think, I was aware of that going into it, but yet probably didn't go far enough in making it a no-till planter.
Yep. So just going forward, we got a couple minutes yet still before we eat into Francis's time or anything. So just wondering if you know what the rye population is, and then Tom's next question was whether or not you'll plan to continue to use hog manure in the fall with the cereal rye.
Probably will not do the hog manure. I didn't take a stand count on the rye. We planted the 160 pounds an acre, but I can't say I had like a final stand count or anything on that. The biggest reason we put the hog manure out there was that it was because we could, and the pit was about to run over, and it was the only place I could go with hog manure, and so it wasn't that I did it necessarily on purpose for this, for the rye, but so no, I'm not planning on doing that again, and so.
Yep, good to know. And Gary's next question then is, did you have coulters on the planter?
No.
Okay. Yep.
No coulter.
Well,
No,
then it looks
no trash whippers or anything like that.
okay. Looks like there's some good comments here, and okay. Well, maybe then, yeah, Francis, if you're ready to go, we can transition right into you.
Great. I guess you can hear me, right?
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yep.
I'm going to go right into it. I've done this for 3 years, and the first 2 years I had really good success, and then the third year I'll talk about that too. The first year I planted the rye in 2014 in the fall, and then the picture you see is in the spring when I was planting the beans. I had an international planter I borrowed from somebody with 15-inch rows, and so it was a real planter. It did a great job of getting through the rye, putting the seed down and covering it. So it did a great job of placement. I should have probably put a higher rate. I went like about 170 population on the soybeans, and it's recommended to go up to 200, 220 or more. So anyway, you can see this is when the planter went through. Then I didn't have a roller crimper. So what I did is I waited until after anthesis because I knew I didn't have the best tool for rolling it down. And if you wait till after it's past the vegetative stage, then it is less likely to pop back up again. So I waited till milk stage or even early dough stage and rolled it, and it did a great job actually of rolling it down. And I think the two things I've noticed: if you have a thick stand of rye, it'll lay flat a lot better. If you have a thin stand, it'll come back up. And if you roll too early, it'll come back up. So a little later, a little thicker, makes all the difference in the world. So this stuff did about as good a job as a roller crimper as far as the function here. And then, is it going to work? I think I'm locked up here. Steve, you want to forward it for me? Steve, can you hear me? Uh-oh.
Yep, I just kicked it forward. Now we're looking at, do you see that same slide as a mat of rye there with beans coming out? Is that what you're... Francis, you hear me? Francis?
Hello?
Francis, can you hear me?
No. You hear Scott? You hear Steve? Francis, check 1, 2. Uh-oh. We had a minor issue earlier with his mic, so Francis, clearly can't hear me, but he logged out and logged back in earlier, and that seemed to solve the problem for the time being earlier. Maybe that would work again. If we have to, Billy, I'll skip forward towards you, but I think if Francis gets back in a minute, then we'll just let him pick up.
I think everybody can hear Francis. If you could.
Yeah. The thing is, yeah,
you did type it in there.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
So it sounds like everybody can hear him, but he doesn't know what slide we're on.
Yeah, he probably logged out because what happened, you moved the slide forward, but it probably didn't move forward on his computer, and then
Yeah.
So my guess is he'll be back within a minute. Why don't we just see if he comes back in?
Yep. So thanks for hanging on, everyone.
Yep. We could think about it like when the teacher said I have to run back out to my car because I forgot my notebook. It's like, yeah.
Oh man, that's when you get in trouble. Okay, Francis is back. I just made him a presenter again, so hopefully this solves that issue for the time being.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Where are you?
We're on, I think maybe let me look here. We are on your third slide. Yep.
Okay, so you can see how the problem with the cultipacker is that if you went the opposite direction that you planted in, it wrapped up in the roller. So I had to roll perpendicular or else in the same direction. But it was a different width in the planter, so it didn't work real well in that regard. So great, it's going. So then the beans came popping up through there, And you can see a few little, this thing here working? If I test this thing or not, but you can see a few little sprigs of rye came back up, but they never amounted to anything. And so the beans just came popping through and did a great job. And I had three little fields, about 5 acres each. And 2 of them were just perfectly clean on weeds. You can see just a few little weeds. Oh, I better not play with that type thing. But it was pretty clean. Shoot, I think I'm stuck again. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
I hear you.
You hear me?
I can't forward it. Why don't you forward the screen? I can't forward it.
All right.
Can you see, Francis? Can you see that he's forwarded to the next slide? We're thinking that maybe you can't see it if you're locking up.
I can't, but I can see. I have my PowerPoint up. I pulled it up. Now you see a field with some weeds in the background?
Yep.
Yep.
This is the one field that was by the road, unfortunately, that was weedy. And I pulled a few weeds in the front, but for some reason, and I think because I rolled that one first and it was starting to rain, and I rolled and made a little mud and so on, and anyway, I got a bunch of water hemp in there. But the other 2 were very clean, which is confusing. Let's go on to the next slide. And this is at the end after the beans were harvested, and you can see that it was a nice mat. I really like that mat. And if you go on to the next slide, you can see that it was really rotten, but it was a nice mat still. And if you go on to the next slide, I could just pull that mat right apart, which was kind of nice to see. That you could easily no-till into it if you want to. And those beans yielded really well. For the first 2 years, they yielded like 45 to 50 bushels to an acre. Now the next slide shows the roller-crimper. And so I actually, this was Billy's the previous year, and I borrowed it, and then I bought it from him, and he had one remade. And so this next year I did about 200 acres of rolling down. And the first year I did it in areas that had been old pastures. And I put a couple ton of manure on it, dairy manure in that case, and I think it helped a lot with getting the rye really getting up there. And the second year I had a couple hundred acres, and I also put some manure on there. And I found that where I had a really good biomass, go to the next slide, you can see Kathleen Dellett standing in the field, where I had a really good rye biomass, I had really good weed control. You almost kind of can calibrate your eye. When you're starting to roll it down, you see, you don't have quite a thick enough mat, and you know it's not going to work. But I did some anyway, because it was getting late, and I just, I got a decent yield. This field that she's standing in was like about 45 to 50 bushel an acre. And other fields that were weedy, I got in the 30, 35 bushel acre range, and so I was happy with it. And the key thing for me is that some of these fields are very hilly, and I would never plant a row crop on them otherwise. Before I bought the land, they had been row cropped to death, and I had lost the A-rise in some places. But now, with this kind of a system, if I can put a little starter manure on the rye and get the rye biomass really cooking, and then I roll it down and plant the soybeans, and I can plant on a hillier piece of land that I wouldn't normally put a cash crop like that on, but I can do it in a way I think that I'm improving the soil at the same time. So I'm pretty excited about it. So let's go on to the next slide, and this is this year. And you'll see a picture of I had some armyworms come in, and it took me a while to figure out what happened. And I learned afterward, I didn't know anything about armyworms. I learned that they actually mostly work at night, so that's why I couldn't find them. But they were eating the soybeans off the seedlings as they came through the ground. And I kept finding these little yellowish, greenish little poop balls it looked like, which I guess I thought were the armyworms. Next slide. And this is from this fall. I planted quite a bit of rye, and I had about 100 acres of it eaten up by these armyworms. There's the armyworm there. And again, you can only find a few of them in the daytime, and I didn't look at night. You go to the next slide, you see a bare field in the front. That was a field of rye that had been like 6 inches tall and green as can be a week before, and they ate the whole thing down. And I lost about 100 acres of rye to the armyworms, and it didn't come back. So I've replanted, but I don't know if I'll get enough biomass now for next year. But if not, what I'm going to do is start to use, I'm going to plant them in rows instead of with the drill. I've been using the drill otherwise. And I think, go to the next slide. So I have this Heinecker cultivator with wide sweeps, that single sweep cutting down through the middle. that I use in otherwise for row cropping, but I'm going to try to do that with I did it a little this year with the rye biomass down there. You can get underneath that with that single shank, and it'll cut off all the weeds, except for in the row, of course. Let's see what's next here. Next slide shows, you can see the wide sweeps on that. So I think that's going to be, what I'm going to use that for is where I think I have not enough biomass. If I think I have enough biomass, I'm going to drill it in. If I think I have not enough biomass, I'm going to come in and row crop it, and then come in if I have to with cultivate with these sweeps. Next slide. I did a little, do I have time, Steve, to talk a little bit about this hairy vetch thing?
Yeah, yep, couple minutes.
Okay, so the second year I did it, I planted in the fall some oats with hairy vetch, and you can see that slide there, and the next slide shows parting the oats, and you see the hairy vetch coming through. I threw little radishes in and so on, and the reason for the oats, they say, is to help protect the hairy vetch in the winter, if you for frost reasons, for killing and so on. The next slide shows I actually got an ice storm, and I thought it killed everything. I came back in the spring, and I couldn't find any hairy vetch. It seemed like just nothing almost, and so I gave up on it. It was only 2 acres, just a trial. But I happened to drive by that field next slide, in mid-June, and I couldn't believe all the hairy vetch that was blooming in there, especially on half of the field. Half of it was a little weak. So we just came in, and I didn't think it was going to work. Next slide, you can see this is a planter, 36-inch rows, and it's not a no-till, just a regular planter. It even had these little trash thrower things, these little wheels here. And I thought surely it was going to plug up like crazy. We went in there, and next slide, it actually was amazing. It never plugged up once. And it drove right through that rye, I'm sorry, that hairy vetch, and it did a good job of planting it right in there and covering it up. And the problem was then we didn't have any rain for a couple of weeks, so a lot of it didn't germinate for a couple of weeks, so it was very, very late. And if you go on the next slide, you can see where it was before and where I planted and where I didn't plant. The planter just pretty much knocked it down. And so I came back a couple of days later, next slide, with the roller, and it was already dead. I mean, the roller didn't really do much. So I wouldn't have had to roll it. And the last slide then, next slide, is showing a corn. Now, I said it was 2 acres. Half of the field was pretty weedy, not so good. Other half of the field where the hairy vetch was pretty good, had a nice mat. It was pretty clean, hardly any weeds, and I got, it didn't look nitrogen deficient. So I was pretty pleased that there is some potential there, but I need to work more on that. So last slide, I just wanted to go through summarize some of the key things that I've learned. First of all, you need enough biomass. Rodale says 8,000 pounds per acre. If you don't have enough biomass, it just isn't going to control the weeds. And the second thing, plant the rye as early as possible. In the fall, and if you can do it, I like to do it after a small grain or maybe an old pasture or something, or an old hayfield. If you can get it in the 1st of September, early September, then you can really get a rye crop. And Joel Gruber has found that if you plant early, you don't need as much seed. He says he can get by with even 1 bushel per acre if he plants like late August and early September, because it tillers more if you plant early. But later planting requires more rye seed. And the last cut on that one is that the main thing is that the no-till planter has to be able to cut through the rye and to place the seed at the right depth and cover the seed with soil. If you can't get that done, you're going to be in trouble. So that's basically what I wanted to cover.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Francis. We do have if anybody's got a quick question for Francis before we move on, we're actually unbelievably a little bit ahead of schedule here, so we've got an extra minute if we need it. It looks like Steve and Tom are typing something, so we'll give them just a minute to see if they can get a question in here before we move on to Billy. Francis, are you able to see the chat box, or are you behind on that too?
I think that I'm locked up on that.
Okay, all right. So it looks like there's a question. Chris says, what stage was the HV at when you planted corn? Do you know what stage that hairy vetch was at when you planted the corn? Yeah.
Yes, good question. It was fully bloomed, and I think it was even starting to making some pod. And that's the key thing, I think. And Billy's going to show you a different experience. I think that if you try to roll it when it's still vegetative, it's going to want to stay vegetative, and if you can wait till it's completely in the reproductive stage, it can't get back into the vegetative stage. So
Yep.
And the problem is that's late. So either we need an earlier hairy vetch or whatever. You know, the timing is a little bit tricky there.
Exactly. Yeah.
I would mention one more thing. Scott mentioned about pollen the tractor, and we had that really bad the second year. We couldn't go too far without plugging it up with the pollen, and that's one reason why I like to wait till the milk stage. Wait till the pollen's gone, and not only that, but the rye will stay down on the ground better, and you can avoid plugging your tractor's radiator up with that pollen.
Yep. Good points. Next question then for you, Francis. When was the cereal rye / oats planted before the corn? Tom Wynn wants to know.
That was planted pretty early. The oats and the hairy vetch, they were planted like early September. And actually, earlier would be better still. I think I could have gotten a better. It probably was maybe a little more. I tried for early September. It was probably like maybe the second week in September. But if you could get it in, I've heard maybe like late August, it'll get a better start and have a better results. One more thing I just thought of too is that as Scott mentioned, that we've noticed too that the soybeans will be a little slower to get going in the rye mulch compared to in a tilled field, and I presume that has to do with the temperatures and so on. But they seem to catch up. In my case, they seem to catch up once they get going.
Yep. Great. And yeah, it looks like Steve made another comment about the vetch, and he says, on 40 acres I had very poor stand and heavy armyworms and worried all summer, but was happy with 114 bushels per acre. And so that's a good segue, because we've got Billy, who's going to talk here now about his experience with that hairy vetch going into corn. So we'll have keep taking the questions for all of these guys because they'll stick around. But right now we've got Billy, who's going to go directly into that hairy vetch into corn.
Okay, fascinating.
Whenever you're ready.
Yep. Okay. I'm coming across. Yep. Yeah. Just checking with you, Steve. Making sure
Yep,
that
you are.
I'm on. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. So we all kind of have our little papers here in front of us, and we created these questions. So we'd hope that the three of us would follow along the same guideline of what we did, so that it would be easier to follow through. So this was the second hairy vetch experiment, was with our farm and with George Naylor's farm, and there were some variables that we tried to see how it worked with one field that actually tilled the vetch, and our field where we didn't till the vetch. We let it grow. And so I'll give you, I don't have many pictures of George's field, but I can give you the results because I pretty much watched it pan out the whole growing season. So for the purposes of the SARE grant, we wanted to see if we could get hairy vetch to overwinter, and if so, if it could provide the majority of the nitrogen that we needed for the corn, and if we could crimp it at the right time to be able to maximize that sustained release and that you get from vetch. Probably many of you understand how it works. It takes about 21 days for it to start, and then you can, for about another 21 to 30 days, it releases nitrogen. So you do want to try to get that. You're not going to get it at emergence or when it really needs it, so you're going to need some other source at that time. But after that period of time, then it gets a nice boost throughout the growing season. So that's the theory about using the vetch. If it grows tremendously, then you also get the advantage of weed suppression. Not quite to the same extent as rye. It doesn't last as long, nor is it as thick, but it still does provide suppression. So we used a VNS organic hairy vetch from Albert Lee, and applied airplane 24 pounds to the acre. As a companion with a 1.5 bushel of acre of oats. The plane had a difficult time. It really wasn't that windy, but the vetch seed is extremely light, and this was actually the first time that this pilot had applied vetch. Although he was an Air Force pilot and with the big jets and things, this was a new experience for them, and we later on, after we saw the stand come up, we were somewhat disappointed that there was the borders pretty much around all of the 42 acres had not really gotten much vetch at all on it. And so as the growing season went on, we showed what happened when you don't get the stand of the cover crop and you're depending upon it. I'll move to the next one here. So, yep, the vent, we're all familiar with oats. They terminated in early December. The vetch we had a mild winter, and we're no-till for 14 years on this ground, so there's a tremendous amount of residue available. The vetch grew really well, and it died off. It froze off on the top, but the root structure was so deep that it had no problem surviving. And okay, so working with ISU and Ajay and Nair and some others that have experimented with vetch, we were under the assumption that if we could crimp it with both the experiences of the Jeff Moyer and the trials that have been done at ISU, that full flower is the magic mantra that you follow with vetch. And we tried to hit that, but I didn't really know what full flower was. And there's a tremendous amount of flowers, and there are bumblebees everywhere, and pollinators, and lacewings, and bees. It's a beautiful thing, but you really can't tell exactly, at least I couldn't, whether it was ready to go or not. But we know that we had to plant. So we roller-crimped it on the 25th. I have a video of it, but generally it just looked like it killed it. It rolled really well. It was probably at about 75% flowering now that I've looked in the past and learned more about it. So it wasn't at 100%. There weren't any pod sets yet. And it sprung back up in about 2 days, as if it hadn't even been rolled. So I rolled it again on the 30th. And it did the same thing a couple of days later. So I mowed it. And there wasn't much left now because it just mowed it right down to the ground. And it just came right back as if it hadn't even been mowed. And it grew even more vigorously. So I mowed it again, thinking like it has to die now. And it didn't. So the crimper was built by Minahan Metalworks. He's built many of them now, and it's just like the I&J model. And we had a tremendous issue with terminating the vetch. In fact, we couldn't terminate it. So we planted the corn, thinking like we'll figure this out. In 30-inch rows, 34,000 population to the acre, and the vetch strangled the corn when it tried to come up. So it was pretty much keeping it from coming up because it was just growing with a vengeance. The vetch was just going crazy. Scott and Kevin Fall came out, and Kevin suggested that I forget the corn and just raise the vetch, which at the time seemed kind of crazy, but maybe that might have been the better option at the time. Well, Scott really came through as a key player in this because he had an old Buffalo high residue cultivator that he wasn't using anymore that we needed to do a little work to, and I had to do something to try to save this crop because all you could see was vetch and it was growing like crazy. Well, I couldn't see the corn. So Joe and some others, we bought flags everywhere we could get them. We got about 3,000 flags, and we walked the 42 acre field. I think that maybe there's a picture here, and we flagged about every 15 or 20 feet. We flagged where the corn was, so that I could use the cultivator to try to get those between row vetch terminated and allow the corn to have a chance to grow. That was the goal. This is what it looked like after we cultivated. You can see that, of course, the corn is growing, right in the middle of this, right in the middle of that vetch. You can come, these are 20-inch shovels, so I came as close as I could without trying to hit the corn. And yep, there is corn there. It's about, it was about 8 to 10 inches tall maybe here, but the vetch was about 2 to 3 feet tall, so you really can't see the corn. Here's Joe picking up a piece of it just to show how beautiful this cultivator was. Just really fantastic. It really worked well. And this is a picture of what it looked like about 7 days after that picture of Joe there. And so it pretty much got all the between row, but everything that you see, this is like, it's almost like being on another planet, isn't it? It's like, are they raising vetch now in rows? Well, that's what it kind of looks like. But there's corn in there. And so we're like I had some neighbors come out and they thought maybe we would get a bushel or two of corn per acre was their guess. And you can see now that once that vetch started to die, and this was about 7 or 8 days later, all of a sudden the corn started popping through here, through the vetch, because it was getting N, essentially, from the terminated vetch. There's some of that N now that had mineralized. We got a shower, unlike what happened to Scott, and we got just enough rain that the vetch actually grew more also because of the rain, but the corn now started to compete with the vetch. And this should be, about 3 feet tall now, and it's only about a foot tall. So we're way behind the 8-ball here. And this was another picture of, I don't know what happened there, but the pictures came up on the side there. Just a different angle. I'll move forward. So the amazing thing about this is, see, I don't have it on let me see if I have it on my slide. It's about 2 weeks. This is 2 weeks later. So when this happened, and you see it's nice and clean in the rows now. So the corn came through. And this was a medium height corn to begin with, so it only grew about 6.5 to 7 feet at full height. And so we had hope here. But the thing you have to realize is this is about August. And my neighbor's corn was, almost going into dry down stage. And we're just forming ears. And so what's going to happen? We really, at this point, had some hope that things would happen well, but that didn't happen. There just wasn't enough time. The corn didn't get a good start. The vetch outperformed way beyond our imagination that it would be so difficult, in fact, to the extent that we couldn't even terminate it. So the glutton for punishment that I am, we're actually going to do it again and see what happens and try to take better control of. From what I've learned is that you really want the vetch to be in at least the 1 to 2 pod stage. If you're going to roller crimp it with a roller crimper, it has to have gone beyond 100% flowering. With experience in Maryland and Pennsylvania and the Rodale Institute, it has to be beyond 100% flowering. Just as Francis mentioned with rye, if you can wait till milk, if you roller crimp it, it's down. It's not coming back. You just one time hit it, done. That's my experience with it. With vetch, it's pretty similar. The issue with this is that we don't know when that's going to be, and it might be even different next year. So the corn did horrible. The moisture, it didn't. 27%, 29%. We actually sold it at. It was 29% moisture level. There was like none around the outside. 2 bushel the acre is maybe even generous. There was almost no corn where it was just weeds, and the corn didn't grow where there was no vetch. Nothing happened. It didn't have enough nitrogen, even though we had put 2.5 ton on of chicken litter the fall before. Next time, what are we going to do different? Well, we're going to wait definitely until it's at pod set before we finally kill it. Jeff Moyer, in my conversation with him at IOA last week, gave me a suggestion because I told him that we're going to, we have to make sure that we can get the vetch under control. And he suggests tricking it. They've done that where when the vetch is starting to grow and it's doing pretty good in the spring and it's way before you should ever even think about crimping it, is crimp the heck out of it. And what it does is that it tricks the vetch into thinking that it better hurry up and get to reproduction. So when it grows back again, it almost like misses the stage and it accelerates to get to the full flowering stage. And he said if you do that twice, once you see it accelerate, crimp it again, then it's just going to, when it comes back, it's just going to flower and set pods. And that could be as much as a month earlier than when it normally would have done this. So that was their experience at Rodale in Pennsylvania. So he suggested me trying that if we really want to make sure that we can control it before it's too late. And so that's what we're going to actually try this next year, is to control it earlier on. So I think I'm at the end of this, but let's see, there was another suggestion that I was going to, so here's the good news. For George anyway. George did the same thing that I did, except George disked in the vetch 2 weeks before he planted. And George got 225 bushel, the same exact, it is a different farm. It's 2 miles down the road, but it's also not his best land. It's been very weedy, and it's the best corn crop he's ever gotten off of that 40 acres. And it averaged about 225 of the same corn that I grew that we, had a hard time hitting 50 bushel because it got so starved and strangled by the vetch, essentially, is what the moisture is almost the same, being only 2 miles away. Sometimes he'd get 2 inches, sometimes we'd only get 1. Sometimes he'd get 1, sometimes we get 2 inches. So it was very similar all the way around, except for that one thing that George did differently, and that he tilled it in when it was about any later, and it probably would have wrapped around the disc and he wouldn't have been able to disc it. So it was about a foot tall. It hadn't gone into flowering yet. So it really didn't produce as much nitrogen as it does when it goes to full flower. But he was able to control it and get the corn planted with the same planter, and everything else was the same except for that one thing. So we're no-till, because a person could jump, well, why don't you just do the same thing? And that'd be nice, but I guess. But, we're trying to control our weed bank, and we found that disturbing the soil as limited as possible seems to control that pretty well. So we are going to, I'm very thankful that in this experiment we were able to find out what happened if you were in a tillage situation and do everything else the same, what would happen. And now we know, at least in this one little experiment, the corn really produced. We got this corn from GEI seed from Alex Paez, and the trials for this corn, this is an organic non-GMO corn, were very high all over the state, in Nebraska and Minnesota and Iowa. They're very high 200s, and which is astronomical for an organic. But they were just absolutely beautiful ears, 16 to 18 around, 42, 40 up to 46 length. They just closed all the way at the end. It was just beautiful ears of corn, and lots of them. So we had a few of those. We just didn't have enough of them.
Billy?
So, yeah, thank you.
Billy, so yeah, it sounds like all things are the same, but Rob wants to clarify. George's farm just a couple miles away, is he also organic, or is he in a conventional spray system?
It was transition.
Okay.
It'll be, that field will be, that's in the second year transition, and we both did the experiment the first year with what Francis and Scott described. Where planted the rye, broadcast the rye actually, the fall before, and then planted directly into the standing rye, and had very good luck with weed suppression, and yield was good enough. And so this was the same field that was year 2 of the SARE study, where we experimented with vetch. We also used a soil amendment to see if the soil amendment would have some effect on helping the vetch over winter. But the winter was so mild that we really couldn't see that much of an effect from the soil amendment. It seemed not to make much of a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And but as far as controlling the vetch, disking controlled it without any, that it was terminated with just one, and it wasn't a heavy disking; it was a light disking. George he didn't do his normal tillage. It wasn't a primary type of thing. He just went through and just knocked down the weeds, almost like rotary hoeing twice or something. It was just kind of a mild, in about an inch and a half, just kind of just got the surface, just ripped the vetch out essentially, and then planted 2 weeks later. So that was it's a pretty good strategy actually, especially for someone that maybe is minimum till. This is a way that you could not worry about the vetch, because our vetch went to seed. There was nothing we could do about it. I mean, it was too late. If we had decided not to try to save the corn, then I maybe could have done something. But we didn't, so I've seen what happens to vetch, and boy, does it produce a lot of seed. We're going to be vetch rich for a while.
So, Billy, I don't know if you can see those questions coming in. There's a couple for you there. Tom's wondering about the chicken litter and if George did that same practice that you did in the fall.
Let me see. Let me see which one I should start at. At Steve. Yeah, that's Steve. He is putting some. Steve and I met a few years ago, and he ended up getting a roller-crimper from the same place that Francis and I got ours. And we had some good conversations on the phone, and he wanted to know about the vetch, and I said, well, that's what I'm going to experiment with. And he said, well, I want to do it too. So Steve pretty much did the same thing. I'm reading what he said. I'm not as concerned that the vetch terminate. My corn was also very slow to thrive. So I think that Steve, had better success as far as yield goes with the vetch, even though he couldn't terminate it as well as he had hoped. But I'm not sure at what level. Maybe he can chime in and say just how much, how was he successful at actually finally terminating it? That's what I'd like to, because I really couldn't ever terminate it totally. It just grew until it just went through its whole cycle, and it was still flowering in July and August. And so, I don't know what you have to do to terminate it, but we haven't figured that out yet. Did you use a no-till? What is that? No-till. Wade Dooley asked. Yeah, I don't know what that word means. Planter? No-till planter. Yes. What was the rye? Let's see. The rye population. Who was that to? For me, maybe. I did 4 bushel the year before. George did 3 bushel, and I did 4 bushel, and our yield was about the same. It didn't seem to make that much difference. Weed suppression was about the same. Everything was about the same on that one. Tom says we continue to use hog manure in the fall, so that was probably for Francis.
Yeah. So Billy, we've covered most of these questions now, a little bit.
Okay.
Until now. There's a question here from Joe, asking you,
Okay.
are there any other crops you'd like to try other than rye ahead of soybeans? And that might be for everyone here actually, because you've all tried that.
Yeah, that's a good one. And Jeff Moyer at the Rodale has done barley, wheat, triticale. Joel Groover has also tried, I think, those 3, and sun hemp. I think there are actually plenty. It just seems as overall for the goal of weed suppression, the cultivar you use of rye is really important, but it does seem that rye really gets that job done well. And I don't know if you're no-till and you don't have any other way to control it, cultivating it wise, and you really need, and you maybe have a weedy field, I think trying something else, it could be risky because Francis, I don't know if I used Elbon this year, and I found that Elbon had a thinner stalk, and it didn't provide as much coverage as the VNS I had actually used the year before, which was Ryman, but it was a combination of something else. And the Aristook seems to be with Joel's and others that is really the best, because not only it's a thick stalk and it grows really well and it overwinters tremendously, is that it provides that earlier on maturity opportunity for you to be able to get the beans in earlier. And now they're doing studies, and I think I would love for some of us to try this. And Francis, I think, was thinking about doing it, where they've had really good luck in Minnesota. And some guys around here, even conventional bean growers, they'll roll. They have a regular roller, you know, and the beans will be coming up at about B1, B2, and they're just like doing good, and then just go out and roll them down. And they found that it stimulates them, and it causes them to set more pods after that. So this is a similar thing that we're doing with the rye, is where they'll plant into the standing rye, and then rather than roller crimping like within 3 or 4 or 5 days, they'll roller crimp in about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. So you can get the beans in earlier and before the rye is really ready. And then you can wait, and like in Francis's case, all the way to milk stage. You just roll it one time, and you're pretty much rolling that big biomass of rye. You're just laying it over the beans. You're really not, you know, you're not just rolling the beans per se. You're pushing the rye on top of the beans, and so it doesn't seem to have the same effect. And the studies have shown no injury on the beans whatsoever if you hit it right at the right time. So that really offers an opportunity with Aristook. The planting window can be much earlier, which I think would really affect outcomes. Yields would probably be more likely to be higher if we could get the beans planted earlier.
Yeah, you're right, and that's something that Scott specifically
Billy, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Francis. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I've used VNS rye also, and I haven't done it, but I like that idea of coming in and planting the soybeans and then waiting till the soybeans are a few inches tall and then rolling. That would give you a lot more time. I would like to try the Aristook, but I have not done it. I basically was saving my own rye seed, so it was a cheap way to do it. So that's what I've been doing so far, but I'd like to plant some Aristook and try that as well.
Yeah, and Scott, it sounded like you mentioned that you just planted Aristook, right? And that your hope is that it's going to gain you a week of rolling and terminating sooner. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, that's correct, and that's just what we've heard from other people. And as far as using other crops, just cover cropping in general, we've found the rye to be so much more forgiving on planting date. I mean, you can plant it later, and it just seems to be more winter hardy than your barleys and ryes barleys and wheat and that kind of thing. So, at least for our area, I think the rye probably works the best.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But as far as the Aristook rye, I mean, it's 2 inches tall right now, and so I don't have any comment on, ask me next year if it was a good thing or not, but we're hoping that it is.
Yeah, exactly. It looks like Francis had to dip out for a second again. I'll get him, if he logs back in, I'll get his mic back on in a second. But Billy, question for you in there was from Gary and Garrett. What was that really good corn that you mentioned again? I heard you said something. You got it from Genetic Enterprises International, Alex Paez at GEI. What was that variety?
That one, we got two. We actually mixed 2 varieties together because Alex thought that they would be good companions. We did 9700 and 9717. 9700 is a 102-day corn. 102-day in the north, 108-day central, 112-day south. So when Alex sells his maturity, he lets you know what to expect depending upon where you are in the state, or if you're up in southern Minnesota, or people grow his varieties all over the place. So it was more like about 106-day for us where we were. 102 was the earliest. 9700 is what the number is. He is sold out, I believe, for untreated. He has treated. We used untreated because of organic, but I know he does have treated, and he's got a lot of trials and all the information you can read about. They're pretty phenomenal, the yields that they got from that corn. It's a beautiful ear corn. And George took some pics, and he kept some because it was the largest ears that in his 40 years of farming that he's ever grown. So it was He was he was really. I wish he was here tonight because he was. I rode around with him. He actually called me and said, "You have to come out here. You won't believe this if I tell you it later." I said, "Okay, I'll come right out." And I rode around with him in the combine, and it was hard to believe, really, just how big the ears were. It was beautiful. Yeah, it made my day because I was coming from just the opposite because we had just we had just harvested a few days before, very disappointing harvest, and so to see your neighbor benefit like that is makes you feel good. That we all get our time, I guess, and it's we immediately we wanted to get the corn, so we called Alex to see if it was available. And we went to his field day, and he said he was going to have plenty, but they sold more than they thought. And it obviously why he had at his field day he had examples, and that 9700 was growing really well next to some other varieties that seemed kind of affected by the dry weather, but the 9700 wasn't. It's really drought resistant also. So I think he's got a winner there. I'm actually going to use Blue River this year. I couldn't get what I needed from. I was going to do the 9700 again and try again, and just knowing the mistakes I had made the first time, that I was going to try to correct that, and but I just couldn't get the seed from him.
I think I'm back. Can you hear me now again?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Great. I've tried a different internet browser. There were a couple of questions I see Joe Irish asked. One was about the Rodell crimps in front of the tractor, so it's all one pass, crimping in front, planting behind. And that seemed like a really neat system, but I've heard people say that if you're on a side hill or if you have to go around a curve on the contour, that it has its problems. And I know even pulling it behind the tractor on a three-point, you can't turn a corner. It doesn't want to turn. It'll just drag the tractor straight. And so I think if you have a flat, square field, putting the roller in front is a good idea, but if you have fields like I have, it wouldn't work. So that's one thing. There was another question. Are there other crops to use? And something I've not tried, but Klaus Martins from New York has said he's done is for planting the rye for a cover crop, he put in about 30 pounds per acre, along with the rye, of Austrian peas, the winter peas. And so they wintered over and he rolled them down with the rye. And he said it worked well. And that would be a way where you could get a little nitrogen going in there too. So that's something I'd like to try in the future.
Yeah, Levi Lyle presented with Jeff Moyer at IOA. I think you were there, weren't you, Francis? And he tried some. Didn't he try some Austrian peas? But they were just peas by themselves, weren't they? Or were they with rye? I can't remember now.
I don't remember. He didn't really elaborate too much, I don't think, on it.
Yeah, but it seemed like there was no problem with terminating them. They rolled right down, no problem.
But I wonder if they would work to do them alone for corn, or maybe them with oats, have a higher rate of seeding, and then try to plant the corn and roll it down. Maybe that's another option instead of hairy vetch. Yeah.
I wanted to do some Austrian peas, and I was warned that they're expensive, and they're not even as winter hardy as the vetch is. So it's a real crapshoot with the peas, and it's kind of too late to do it in the spring. You could maybe frost seed them, but they need to get in the ground, so it's not going to be very effective if you just broadcast them. So I don't know. I'd really like to try the peas because they can even produce, as you just mentioned, even more nitrogen than the vetch. So it's really a nice nitrogen source. Anybody have any experience with using Austrian peas? Because it sounds very attractive to me if you can get them in the fall early enough.
I see Rob Myers said that he's growing Austrian pea in Missouri. It's not quite as hardy as vetch, but easier to terminate.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what Margaret wanted to know. what was the date and the flowering stage of your hairy vetch when you first rolled it. It was about 75% in full flower, I guess. I didn't know what full flower was, so all I knew is it just was flowers everywhere, but evidently it wasn't at 100%. There were no pod set. So the first time that I rolled it, it looked like it was ready to roll because we were ready to plant, so I rolled it. And it pretty much didn't do, it looked like it did. I thought I had submitted that video, but I guess not. It looked like it had done a good job. I posted it on the PFI site when I first did it, and it was amazing. It just flattened it out, and I got out and looked. It was crimped. It was everything like what would happen to the rye, but it had literally no effect. Now Steve waited. I don't know if he's still out there, but Steve waited like about a week more than I did because we both planted almost exact same day. I think he planted just a few days later, but we were almost in sync. Even though he's a ways away from me, but we were almost in sync about when we were going to do it. And he waited a little bit, 1 week, I think. 1 week later, the first time that he crimped it, and he only crimped it once, and he killed it. Most of it. I think some of it came back, but he said the corn now had the opportunity to emerge. It wasn't affected like ours was by the vetch. And I guess that's, and he said he had 100-some bushels. So, I mean, we would have been very happy with 100 bushel. So, it does really seem that I like the idea of what Jeff Moyer says with tricking it, because my experience with the vetch, I've never seen anything like it before, where I did everything. I should have shared this earlier too. Is that I put some mustard, and this is very similar. The mustard and the vetch is similar in what happens when you try to kill it when it's not ready to die, and the mustard, the same thing. In fact, I finally ended up being able to get it, but I crimped it 4 times, and I put it around some pollinator strips around the edges where the vetch hadn't appeared. I learned that the mustard is anti-nematodal. It has kind of like an allelopathic effect like the rye does, and so if you were to put this mustard all around the field, which is what I did, then you could crimp it, and it will die, and it won't really affect the bee. You'll get this advantage because it gets into the mycorrhizae, this allelopathic stuff, and it kind of goes throughout the whole field in theory and helps with any nematode problems. So I tried that, and I couldn't kill the mustard. I mowed it. I did the same thing I did with the vetch, and it was in full flower. It was totally in full flower the first time I crimped it, and it's like no effect on it whatsoever. It laid it down, and then the next day or 2 days, it was just back straight up again. And so then I mowed it. I mowed it right down to the ground, all the way around the whole thing with just a 6-foot mower. Nothing left, and within a week, it was just all the way back up like nothing had happened. So my experience anyway is that you cannot crimp mustard and have it and terminate it. Whereas, and Jeff Moyer said that there are some brassicas that does work in, but it's tricky. You'd think it would just knock it down, but like in this case with with the mustard, it just had no effect. Crimson clover, he really just eliminated. He went to barley, wheat, crimson clover, sun hemp, triticale, Austrian peas, hairy vetch, and that's kind of it. That's like what it works. It works on those crops. And then each crop has a little dependency on like when you actually do it in order for it to be effective. So I think knowing some of that and realizing that rye does so much for you, and you're not getting N, you're sequestering it. You can't really be that successful with corn right away after it, although you can get great weed suppression. But if you could get a earlier maturing rye, I think you could use the rye before corn as long as you had about a 2-week window, and then maybe some sort of starter fertilizer to help the corn emerge. You'll have great weed control, And that's what really seems to be a big factor for the corn to get going well. And I would like to try that in a few years, where we can really see that this Aristook that will mature earlier, and we can get it taken care of. Then that would be nice to be able to try corn in a semi weed free no-till ground anyway. In my case, I think for someone that tills, it would even be easier.
There's a question from Joe Irish. When you roller crimp the stems of rye or vetch, does it have to crack the stems like a hayvine does on alfalfa? It actually does not crack the stem, but because these teeth on the roller are every 6 inches or so, it kinks the stem in all those spots, and so that helps to kill it too. But it doesn't really crack the stem. I wanted to go back real quickly. I was in a big hurry. I didn't think I had time, but I mentioned the third year with my rolling down the rye and planting the soybeans. It wasn't so successful. First of all, I had the armyworms coming in and eating off the seedlings. And when I finally figured out what was going on, I came back then and replanted with the drill, just drilled it right back in there again. And unfortunately, then we were kind of getting into the drought, and so the emergence wasn't quite so good as it should have been. But I did get a crop. I still actually, tomorrow I'm going to harvest it. I'm kind of late. But it's a variable crop. But I'm going to get, I don't know what I'm going to get for a yield, but it's going to be enough to be worthwhile. So that's that. And the other thing on the armyworms on my rye this fall, it ate it right off, and the rye never came back. I replanted that. But I thought afterwards, I have this tine weeder. I just got this Einbach tine weeder I used this spring, first time. And they use this, what it is, it's these flexible tines, and they cover the ground every inch, although they're in gangs, so they're offset. But people use that on small grains for weed control, and when the small grain is just a few inches tall, and the tine weeder goes down about an inch, and it doesn't take out the small grain because the small grain is rooted deeper. But I should have been smart enough I should have thought to use that on the armyworms when they first came in there. I mean, I can't imagine these little armyworms could have handled that tine weeder if I'd have come through there and wiped them out. I think I probably could have saved that crop if I'd have done that, but I didn't think about that till later.
Wow, that sounds like a good idea. So I was going to ask, I tried to post something on the PFI site, but I never really did see it. And what I was looking for was some of you may be familiar, in the late 70s, early 80s, Blasant made a very narrow cultivator that resembles kind of the high residue buffalo. It just had these two little 4-inch shanks that went underneath the ground, and they were selling it for people that were planting as narrow as 10-inch soybeans to be able to drive with a kind of a utility tractor. And they made these 6-row, 8-row, 10-row, 16-row, these skinny, kind of like high residue cultivators. And so I wanted to try to find one, or to see if anybody uses any sort of a cultivator for 15-inch soybeans or knows where there is one, because the canopy is a very important thing in our area. And George does 30-inch rows, and if I end up having to do 30-inch rows, I will. But our luck with 15-inch rows is that the canopy forms so fast, and it really holds the weeds back. And if you've got the rye there, like that first picture at the beginning slide of this, that was our field 2 years ago when we did our first roller crimping with rye. And that was a really weedy part of the field, and there were no annual weeds. I mean, literally none in that field. And the only thing we had done differently was to have that rye in there, and it crimped really well. We hit it at the right time, and it was just a beautiful place for soybeans to grow. And I think part of why that stayed like that through the growing season was because we were in those 15-inch rows, and the canopy formed real fast. It just kept the light out from in between, so it was just really nice. I don't know if that'll be the case. I don't think it will, actually. For 30-inch soybeans, you'd have to do something in between the row. And the high residue cultivator might be the answer. I think that's what Francis, was that what you used? You used was it a kind of similar to a buffalo that you brought through the field there to get in between row in your beans?
Yes, I did that in just a small area where I had planted. I knew that the rye was not thick enough to really cover control the weeds, so I planted it with on 36-inch rolls, a just regular old planter, and then I used that. It's a Heinecker with a full sweep on it, and that cultivator also has guides on it, so it has wands that feel the crop, and then a hydraulic adjustment automatically on the cultivator. So if you get a little bit off, it'll turn the cultivator and keep you on the roll. So
that's nice.
Yeah, that is really nice. You can't fall asleep with it, but you can get a little bit off.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anybody here ever used? I can't see if anybody has answered the question. Maybe they've never heard of it. Blessant was Blessant. Came out of Illinois, and the company is no longer in business. But it was the answer for a while for people that had 15-inch, 10-inch, and they were in the process of building one. I don't know how you could drive up and down 7.5-inch rows after they're up, but must have been some sort of a narrow tire tractor, I guess, that you could just barely fit in between the rows. And they had a 16-row version of that for 7.5-inch soybeans. So I'd like to find one for 15-inch if anybody knows where one might be. Margaret mentioned that the starter fertilizer application is not going to meet the N need of the corn. So when I was talking about the, yeah, I agree. I guess it would depend upon what the residual was in the field, but the sustained people today were trying to explain to me that I should use their 824 on broadcast 250 pounds an acre. I was telling them about this, what I wanted to do, and they thought that it might work if I was to use sustained 250 pounds pre-plant, that would help the corn get going. So I'm not sure how accurate that is, but that was a suggestion on their part anyway. Right, it's faster economy. So Chris says, yeah, higher soybean seeding rate. Yep, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and they do. You're right. I think I know the one. That study that you're referring to, Chris. Gosh, I mean, I'm going to go 190 this year. I'm at another 60. Wow. I don't know. There's some that argue that they get the same when they've done. PFI has done some of these plots where they've varied the. I can't remember if Scott's were varying. Scott, if you're still there, were you varying the population in those different widths too also? I can't remember in your study.
Yeah,
of beans?
Yeah.
Yeah.
30-inch rows we planted 180,000, and the 15-inch rows we planted 200, and the 7.5-inch rows we planted I think 220 or 225. And was there well, yeah, so what happened? I mean, I know what happened, but was there a way for you to determine if the population had an effect on the growing? I think it was hard to tell, and in that we got our different row spacings by using the same planter with 30-inch rows, but then driving and using our RTK guidance and shifting it over to where we, to get 15-inch rows, we drove over it one more time, but to get 7.5-inch rows, we drove over it three more times. And I think that those extra passes and the gauge wheels and the closing wheels and driving over, I think it helped plant the previous passes. So when we were driving over the same areas 4 times, that actually helped plant, helped close the seed trench of the previous passes. So we just seemed to get a lot better stand out of the narrow rows. But
yeah, and
I don't think it was necessarily attributed. I mean, we got a higher yield in the narrow rows, but I'm not sure that it was just because they were narrow rows.
Sure. And yeah, Scott, I was going to add that research report that you're involved in just came out, and yeah, that one of those key findings was that the narrowest row width of the soybean rows on both your farm and then Jack Boyer's farm resulted in the greatest yields. And then might as well make a quick plug that Jack Boyer's here listening, and so if you've got anything to mention in the chat box, go for it. Otherwise, Jack is actually going to be speaking at our conference in Ames in January 19th and 20th about doing on-farm research, including this project. So at the conference in Ames here in January, you can hear more about that specific research project from the other person that worked on it with Scott on a different farm. He's in Tama. And I posted a link to that research report in the chat box a little bit earlier, so you can scroll up and find that. And there's tons of details about that research that Scott's talking about in that report.
Scott, are you going to be at that cooperators meeting next couple of weeks from now?
Yes, I think so. Yep.
Oh, good, great.
And I think we're going to talk about the research we did. One thing I'll just throw out, because I don't have the answer, and if anybody's got any great ideas, I've really explained that I felt our poor performance in our soybean field was due to the poor planting that we did, along with then the following weather conditions we had. But one thing, when I think about that, I think, well, okay, I know that in some places that the seeds were planted just fine. You know, they got covered up with dirt and there was adequate moisture when we planted. And yet, so I feel like to have those reasons be the cause of having a poor yield, that I would have had a real variance in my plant heights. In other words, where the seeds got planted properly, you know, that I'd have soybeans that were, you know, say of a normal height, and then where these other places that I had that the seed trench didn't get closed, or the seeds were on top of the ground, that you know, those would have come later with a later rain, and then therefore they'd be shorter. But real honestly, our stands were all, I mean, fairly uniform in height. It just seemed to take forever for all of it to grow. So I don't know. I can't explain that. I don't know if anybody's got any ideas.
Well, you know, the only thing close to what happened to you, and I think I talked with you about that when I came out one of the times to look at that field, is that I don't know how we really measure the allelopathic effect of this rye, but it is an extreme weed killer. And when we did the experiment last year, I was really concerned that we had killed the soybeans, because I had 4 bushel. And for about 2.5 to 3 weeks, the soybeans didn't grow. They looked horrible. They had turned lime green. They just looked like they were going to die at any time. And then what you didn't get, but we did get, is we got rain. And the rain seemed to come right at the time when it was necessary to wash all that chemical away out of the rye and get it past that stage. And it was almost like an overnight type thing, where all of a sudden the beans just started to turn green and grow. And they actually, I've got a video of it where in 3 weeks they caught up. I mean, they looked horrible. And in 3 weeks they caught up to the tilled field in George's field, where they were almost exactly the same height and the same color. They were still a little bit darker green on the tilled field, but they looked healthy, whereas they had looked really unhealthy just 3 weeks prior to that. So I'm wondering if in your field, the reason I bring that up is I know you didn't get the rain. And so, but the chemical didn't go anywhere. It stayed there. And what effect, I mean, maybe there's studies on this. What effect does that extended allelopathic effect of the rye have on soybean emergence and growth when you don't get the moisture? You know, it seemed like it put it in such a stall mode that the beans just never recovered. At least that's my guess about what might have happened in that field.
It could be, yeah. It's hard to say.
Yeah, and that's what Margaret's comment gets at right there, is that unfortunately we can't, in these little trials, always sort out the difference between the mulch effect, allelopathic effect, and the effect on soil moisture all at the same time. So, yep. But it's good to hear from 3 different growers who are, trying similar things in different areas, and so this is probably a good time to try and wrap this up, because we could just chat all night, but we've reached our limit. So, looks like we've exhausted the questions in the chat box. So seriously though, Billy and Francis and Scott, thanks a whole lot for taking the time to share your guys' experience. You guys are always willing to share with the PFI network, and we're so grateful for it. And so keep experimenting, keep telling us what you find, and keep, letting us know what you're curious about. And we really appreciate you taking the time to share with us. Thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. Yeah, come back next Tuesday or the next or the next.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks,
for having me.
everybody.